Good afternoon, everyone. I have got you for 7 minutes, and in this 7 minutes, I'm going to concertina a whole year's worth of work that Cancer Research UK have been doing in order to accelerate cures for cancer. And we're doing that by embarking on a really ambitious program of citizen science. And what that means is that we are looking to engage the eyes of the world and get people involved in real-life science by analyzing our data for us. So to kick off then, who is Cancer Research UK? Well, we are the world's biggest cancer research charity. Now what that means is the top 10 drugs in the world, they came from our research labs. That news story I'm sure you all saw about Angelina Jolie, where she opted to have a double mastectomy, a pretty big decision to make. But she was able to make that decision by virtue of a test that she took from which she could infer her risk of developing cancer. Now, that test came from our labs. And in fact, that test came from the scientists who've been working with us on Cell Slider. Now, I know you're all going to recognize Cell Slider because it's been on your app, your Google Trends app, and I'm sure you've all downloaded it and already had a go. If you haven't, I'm not going to be insulted if you start putting eyes down now and getting involved and making some classifications. So, we are at the moment experiencing a bit of a catch-22 with data. Like all businesses, we have a big data issue. So whilst the radical advances in technology means that we can now map the genome, for example, we can image our data for the first time, which is absolutely fantastic. But it means that we are generating terabytes upon petabytes of data. And what's peculiar about our data is that it needs human analysis. And what's interesting about being part of this lineup when we saw the robot and we were worried about machines taking over, in actual fact, what we're saying with cancer research data is that there isn't a machine that is good enough at analyzing that data. There isn't an algorithm that's good enough at looking at our cancer data. It absolutely has to have the pattern recognition of human beings like you and me. So this is work that our scientists are doing day in and day out. But I've mentioned petabytes of data. That's a hell of a lot to get through, right? They can't get through it quick enough themselves. So that's where we started to look at citizen science. And I'll show you now, this is a typical image of one of our tumor data. So this is an image of a precious tumor sample that's been taken from a real-life cancer patient. Now let's look at it. It's not the most appetizing piece of data in the world, is it? In fact, it's actually quite off-putting and a little bit intimidating. So whilst we knew about citizen science, and we thought, yeah, it'd be brilliant. Let's get our data online. Let's get it out there. Let's get people involved in it. I'm certainly, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to get involved in something like that. It's quite scary. And so we had to innovate and look at a different way that we could put our data in line in order to benefit from citizen science. So we held a hackathon last May. And what we did was we had over 50 developers came together, and they came up with this engaging way to wrap up our data, which is called Cell Slider, and I've mentioned it on our app. Now, within 6 months, we had over 1 million classifications made. These classifications are being made by people throughout the world. So about half are in the UK, about a third in the US, and the rest are spread throughout the world. And the key thing for us is we're smashing our targets in terms of speed. In the first 3 months, our citizen scientists, our global public, completed a data set that typically would have taken 18 months to do. And our scientists are working right now and analyzing the outputs from Cell Slider to understand the accuracy. And so far, it's not only looking good, it's actually looking better than the average pathologist. So that's pretty big time. You know, this is real. But we're not stopping there. So we have already embarked on part 2 of our citizen science story, and I'm going to show you just very shortly a film. And what we're looking at here is gene data. Now you can see there's quite obvious peaks and troughs there on that image. The machines can pick up those very obvious peaks and troughs. What the machine cannot pick up is where they begin. Those little small nuances, those little subtleties, only you and me can pick up with our eyes. A machine cannot pick that up. So I'd like to show you the film, and we did this. This was a hackathon or a game jam we had just in March, and we were supported by Google, Amazon, and Facebook. And a little note on that, I think it's one of the first times in the world those 3 companies have actually been in the same room and collaborated for something. And the only issues we had with them was when it came to the press release. And I don't know, well, I think there's quite a lot of press in here. It's a pretty painful process going through a press release, and the biggest issue was from Facebook and Google was the ordering of their names. Obviously, Amazon, pretty pleased, because we went with alphabetical ordering, but that was the only pushback we had. So if you want to play this film, I'll wrap up very quickly at the end.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock. This is Today with Justin Webb and Sarah Montague. A rather unusual project is starting today. Computer programmers or hackers from Facebook, Google and Amazon are spending the next 3 days brainstorming in London, trying to devise a game that we can all download as an app that will mean that whilst we play, we're also analysing the vast quantity of gene data that is out there.
We're in a strange position as scientists. We've got really good at collecting information about the world, but we're not very good at analysing that data, at turning that data into knowledge.
A game jam's a chance for everybody to get together and have creative ideas about how to help advance the cure for cancer.
Take our gene data, wrap it up in an engaging way, and make it into a game. We're going to get the eyes of the world onto our data and hopefully accelerate cures for cancer.
So we've been given some data by cancer research.
You're going to have to guess where the changes in the chromosome are.
And by doing that, you map all the peaks and the troughs, the important information that then goes back to the scientists.
And that will hopefully, over sort of a larger scale, give us quite a good average of where these little points that we're looking for are.
Can you do it? Can you be put on the spot and come up with the goods?
I think we've come up with a really good idea, actually. It uses the data in a great way to create a very simple game that anyone can play and they'll enjoy it.
The rate at which the Cancer Research UK scientists can make progress is limited by how many of their hours they have to spend staring at data. So if we can create something that enables hundreds of thousands of people to do that task, then we can get the scientists back to what they should be doing, and we can all work together to achieve these research goals.
Instead of like going to pubs, maybe we should just be going to hackathons and making science-related projects. I mean, that will be more useful to society, I think.
Right, just to wrap that up then, obviously we're not asking you not to go to pubs. That would be ridiculous. But what we gained from that weekend was we thought we'd come out with 1 or 2 games that would just wrap up our gene data in an engaging way. We actually came out with 12. That's pretty big time. Me as running this project this year, I'm committed to launching at least one of those games. So the interesting thing for us is that we have 11 other games there. There's 11 opportunities for anybody, an individual or a company, to come and get involved and help us out, both with skills and potentially with funding, and help us bring forward the day when cancers are cured. So my shout out is get involved and start classifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Next up, to answer what are the risks when governments make use of available data, Heather Brooke.
Oh, no, it's not me.
Oh, it is on my list. But you're not expecting to go next. OK, fine. In that case, how can data help keep communities safe? Emmanual.
All right, thank you for having me. So some of you may know us from some of our work that we've done, we've been involved in, from Haiti to Japan, to finding safe routes for passing when there's a snowstorm out in Chicago in the US. So I'm from Ushahidi, as I've been introduced. So how does data, community, and safety play? I mean, how do these three actually dance together? And it doesn't look like a death metal concert, but more of a waltz. So how do we perceive data in the current? What's the status quo of data? How do we look at it? There's all these pieces of information. Everyone is literally a walking consumer and producer of information, thanks to these devices we have. We have tablets, Madlets, and whatever other lets that we have in the world. And everyone is tweeting away, Google Plusing away, Facebooking away. And there are all these things that are coming out, but how do we address consumption of this? Do we still rely on the old tools to filter all this information that's coming in? So it's not really about information overload. It's about filter failure. So how do we build a trust bridge? With all these people that are constantly producing information, how do we find information or data that's actually of quality, that's relevant, that's trustworthy, that we can rely on in a particular scenario, especially in crisis scenarios, or scenarios where a lot of data is coming in because a particular event has occurred? So this is just some of the examples in which we've some of the examples in which our tool has been used, our tools have been used for collecting information or data in various cases. The first one on the top left for you, that's Telmama UK right here in the United Kingdom. So this is actually collecting instances of anti-Muslim comments. So this are being collected and being visualized on a map to see where are these actually occurring from. I hope there is none that's actually around Hertfordshire. Towards the bottom, that's harassment in Egypt. So tracking sexual harassment in Egypt. Again, where are these atrocities being committed? What's being done about them? Is it possible to engage, local institutions or local authorities in addressing some of these issues? And finally, the last one, it's a deployment we had a couple of months back when you had general elections, presidential elections. So mapping the various issues that are surrounding the election process. This is just to prevent a resurgence of what he experienced in 2007, 2008, following the fallout after the elections that we had. So while this model has worked for some time, we occasionally run into scaling bottlenecks. I don't suppose we've tried to load boxes of computers on a donkey and put in behind a cat, but I suppose you get the idea. Sometimes we run into this kinds of problems, and perhaps that's because we still, to some level, we still rely on the old technique or the old tools for filtering information, but then perhaps we're not quite equipped to deal with all this producers of information that are coming out because of prevalence of devices. So how are we addressing these challenges? How are we going to crowdsource a filter? How is filtering information going to be more collaborative? How do we farm out some of the work to machines? How do we produce a scenario where there's human-machine collaboration as far as curating and filtering information is concerned? And that's why we've been building a tool called SwiftRiver. And our approach is, we gather all this information that's coming in from different sources. We process this in a stream, which we call a river, and collaboratively, a team of people filter this information, and we visualize and organize this information. Primarily, what we've been known for is putting red dots on a map. So people collect information, and in one or another, it gets to appear as a red dot on a map. How this information is used primarily is, this is up to the users. So we usually don't retain any data by the people that are actually submitting information. So we let the people decide what they want the data to be used for. And some of the use cases that this approach has been used for is a media monitoring use case, first of all. This is in the run-up to the presidential elections this year. So trying to monitor hate speech online, collecting instances where items of speech could be potentially harmful or dangerous and could lead to atrocities being committed. So this is just a sample of one of the reports that came out. And one of the challenges with this is, of course, getting the relevant institutions to act on this information. So in as much as all this data is being collected, in as much as it's being submitted by the crowd, but there's still an extra mile to go. How do we get governments involved to actually enact policies that can actually create a conducive environment or prevent these kinds of things from happening? The next use case is actually out in Washington State in the US. So this is through Pierce County, where they're collecting data from the social web, from news blogs, news feeds, for situational awareness in the context of emergency management and crisis response. So it's a way in which the county government is trying to engage with the citizens as they give out information, and they are also trying to interact with them by giving them useful information as to what to do, how to be better prepared when, in the unfortunate event of a crisis or a disaster. So, if we can be better prepared for the problem now, let's not wait for the situation to manifest itself so that we can start scooting around trying to find out what to do. And that's pretty much it from me. We are Made in Africa, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. And now, Heather.
Oh, great. Great. Hi, I'm Heather Brooke. And I'm going to talk about the risks of government collection of data and dissemination of data. And just in case you don't know, I'm a Freedom of Information campaigner, but also a trustee on Privacy International. And you might think, well, how do those two square? And actually, I think they square pretty easily. And these are the kind of two principles that I operate under about the collection, storage, dissemination of personal data. And it's about consent, the two principles, consent and or public interest. Those are my kind of two operating principles. So the first point of the talk is, well, why is this talk about government? I mean, what about Google? What about private companies? And I might mention them a little bit later on. But the reason I talk mostly about government is primarily because we have little choice about having a government. We have it whether we like it or not. We have to fund it whether we like it or not. And most importantly, it has the monopoly on force. And the force can be contracted out to private companies, G4S, Serco, but that force is, at the origin, comes from a government. So this is my first slide. Who recognizes this? This is from one of my favorite movies, Brazil, a very prescient film. I just watched it last night to remind myself about this film. And one of the other things that the state does is it identifies us. We have an official identity that's defined by the state. And one of the dangers is that our official identity can come to usurp our actual identity. And that's what this scene from Brazil is, where there's a suspected, somebody who's been defined as a terrorist, whose name is Archibald Tuttle, and a fly gets swatted on the paper, the record, and it becomes Buttle. And so the sort of very militaristic police SWAT team go to Mr. Buttle's house and arrest him in this sort of like pre-Guantanamo-esque type arrest and take him away, and he's eventually interrogated and killed, in this case of mistaken identity. Well, you might think, well, that's just a film, that's not happening in real life, but I just wanted to really quickly read you this little episode, which I came across when I was doing this previous book of mine, The Silent State. And it was somebody that I met whose name is Rupert Collins White. And for a year and a half, he didn't exist because his local council, Haringey, had put his name as Rupert Colling White with a G. And he found this out when he tried to get credit. He was denied. And he was denied because for a year and a half he didn't exist. And he went to his credit company and said, what do you mean I don't exist? I'm here, what do you mean? They said, well, as far as we know, you don't exist. You've just disappeared from our files. And if you have a question with it, you'll have to take it up with your local council because they're the ones who dropped you off the file. And so he did, and that's when he discovered that they had, through a clerical error, they'd misspelled his name from an S to a G. And when he said, well, that's incorrect, they said, computer says no, and they refused to change it. And that's the kind of arrogance that the state can often have, is that the official identity that they ascribe to you becomes more important than your actual identity. So the second thing, these are mutants. I don't know if another film that I quite like, Alien and Aliens. So this is about data that's collected, and then it can be combined in different ways to, you might have consented, or there might be a data set that's collected by government which is in the public interest, or that is people originally gave their consent for, but then it can be sort of cross-fertilized with other data sets, and you can create these sort of mutant data sets for which nobody either gave consent nor is there a justifiable public interest. So this is particularly important when it comes to health. So at the moment, we have a huge number of data sets that are collected about our health, because the NHS is one of the biggest collectors of data, health data in the world. And we have to be thinking about, well, how are we going to collect those data sets? How are we going to cross-combine them? Does everything need consent? What's in the public interest? So that's one of the big risks. The third risk that I see is about information asymmetry, because it is true that information is power. And power is unaccountable to the extent that it's faceless. to the extent that there's no individual that you can talk to. And this can also be combined with the second point that I mentioned about combining data sets. And that's where you start getting into watch lists, kill lists, worked on the WikiLeaks leaks and in the Iraq war logs. One of the things that we discovered was about this Task Force 373, which is a kind of assassination squad that goes around and assassinates people based on intelligence, which is not part of due process. You can't, but it's sort of this cross-collaboration, this cross-fertilization of data that comes together, which isn't public, but which is used to categorize people in ways that they can't question or challenge. And it is very disturbing. I mean, and I think particularly with the state, which does have the monopoly on force, but it's about the information asymmetry. So it's where somebody's collecting data on you, and you don't have any idea what they're collecting. You don't know how it's being used. And that's where the two principles come in about consent and about public interest. So in some cases, I don't think consent is actually always needed. I don't think you can actually always get it. So I'm thinking here of court records or land records. A lot of people wouldn't, or companies' house registrations, for example, a lot of people don't want that information out there. But despite their lack of consent, for our public good, in the public interest, that information, those data sets need to be out there. So those are this is somebody trying to battle against the faceless wall of bureaucracy, which I've had a lot of experience with myself. And it's really about trying to, if you want power to be accountable, you have to put a face on it. I mean, one of the most difficult things, if you're trying to to make government accountable, is just trying to figure out who works for it, just trying to get a staff directory, just trying to get names, to put a face onto this blank wall of power. And you might say, well, a lot of companies are like that too. And in fact, Facebook has an office in London, and they won't tell anybody where it is because they sort of want to keep this sort of wall of this faceless wall. How do you write to them? How do you interact with an actual person? And I think these big data companies equally have, if they want, they do have power, and if they're going to be accountable for the data they collect, they need to have faces that people can go to and ask questions and find out what's going on with that data. So that's somebody riding the wall. I see very metaphorical, these slides. But that's really what I see, is that there is no sort of contradiction between freedom of information and privacy, as long as we're thinking about those two principles, about consent, trying to get consent, particularly if there's no public interest in the data you're collecting, then you definitely need consent. And if you can't get consent, but if you have a viable and justifiable public interest argument, then also that's another way to govern how we collect and disseminate data. So that's me, done, thanks.
Thank you very much. We've got a couple of minutes. I'd quite like you to reflect on what each other have just said, because Amy, I wonder what you make of Heather's worries and whether you think there's sort of an acceptable level of trade-off of risk, given the benefits that you seek.
In terms of putting our data online?
Yeah.
Well, the key thing for us, and it is very good points that you raised, is that we have received full ethical approval to put our data online, and our data is fully anonymized. There's no metadata.
What does full ethical approval mean? By who?
By the ethical committee, it was the Fulham ethical committee. So the UK, in terms of data, and certainly Cancer Research UK's data, any trial data that we have has to go through this very rigorous process to make sure that we are meeting their standards. And for us, those standards meant that if we were going to put their data online, there has to be absolutely no metadata behind it. You can't determine anyone personally behind it. The other thing is that each of those images that you see is actually 1/12 of the full core. So that's 1/12 of an image. So again, it's just further complicating it and making it even harder to determine someone. And that's the standards that we had to adhere to, and we did.
What sort of structures do you think we need to create in society to deal with your worries?
Well, I mean, The thing that always gets picked up about technology is it's moving so quickly, and everyone thinks we've got to change the rules of the game every 5 seconds. But actually, values are very static. What are our values? And in terms of privacy, I think that we can all agree on an idea of privacy where it affects a private individual going about their private lives, and how are we going to allow that information to be put in the public domain. And really, I think consent, I mean, I've kind of written and talked about this for a long time, and I've distilled it down into those 2 points, and maybe people can add them, but really I think it's around consent or a public interest argument.
I think just to pick up on that, and the pretty key piece I omitted to mention is that each piece of data has been donated by someone who has actually consented for that piece of data to be used for future research. So I kind of jumped on a bit.
That takes me to where I was going to ask anyway. I mean, how easy and how clear is informed consent, do you think?
Well, I mean, that's the issue with a lot of this stuff, is you don't know what's collected. And so you actually
how informed is the consent?
Yeah, you don't know, you don't have a really clear idea what's being collected, and you don't know how it's being used or who it's being shared with. So, you know, this is an issue I have a lot with, you know, a lot of the social media or Facebook, Google. Do we always know exactly all the stuff they're collecting? I mean, it's a very interesting experiment for all of us to do, to make a subject access request to any of these companies to find out all the data that they collect on us. And somebody's done that to Facebook. They've got like 80 pages of all the data that's collected.
I mean, Emmanuel, what Heather said was our values sort of stay the same on this. Do you think that's right? Or do you think we're moving towards a time where we will care less?
Not quite. I think more and more as the machines become powerful, they become capable of extra things that we didn't imagine 10 years ago. We are more and more concerned about, you know, what exactly it is that we should feed into these boxes, whether they're black or white. And so we want to be involved. We want to have a say in, you know, what about ourselves gets shared with other people. I don't want to get an obscure call about a credit card offer while I'm on holiday, and that's the last thing that I need to be thinking about or answering questions about. So on some level, yes, we are all on the same page regarding the basics.
And I think just to finish, a distinction needs to be made. You guys seem to be talking more around personal data. Certainly for us with the cancer data, those people have consented and they've been part of a clinical trial. So when they signed up to the clinical trial, samples were taken. And then the majority tend to tick on the box for consent, and it's very informed, and there's people that guide them through that process. So ours is very transparent, as it should be.
And on that, I think we will leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you especially, Emmanuel, for coming from Nairobi.
Okay.